the names of 2 people from your subdistrict that you submit to Connie Kanoki by January 2nd. And those individuals will sit on a committee that will start out meeting once a month in the evenings. The first meeting will be on January 18th from 6 to 8 p.m. As things get busier, they may need to meet twice a month as we move forward, but January is kind of a busy month, so we'll start with one meeting. There will be lots of education done at the front end of that meeting, and Mr. Evans and Ms. Kanoki have been working with an outside individual to come in to be the facilitator for the process, so that that individual can who's been through it, a former or retired CFO who can help kind of walk through that process. And so I guess that should give everyone comfort to know that we'll be figuring out how to pay this next year's ARC through that, and we'll probably learn more definitely what that number is as we move into March and April, I'm guessing. So that's one of the things I just want to point out. If you could get names to Mrs. Kanoki by January 2nd, it's probably people who are very engaged in the district, but also love to understand the finance and budgeting aspect of it too. The second thing that I just want to point out is that the district had accrued for a $6 million upgrade to PeopleSoft, and that is on track to go live in July of 18. It will be a full implementation of the financial package. One of the things that you saw in the management letter and in the management report part of the audits, if you went through each section, it talked, and Simon Johnson talked specifically about some of the shortfalls that the district has. A number of those, I would say most of them, are because of an inadequate, outdated financial package and software. This will help not only the financial side, but it's a huge benefit for HR as well. And it will, cover the whole gamut for the district. So we're looking forward to that happening. The other thing that I wanted to point out that Mrs. Kanoki had shared with me is that any roof claims from the hailstorm that happened this summer will be picked up through the insurance process versus through the second phase of the bond. And so they're working through those right now to figure out what amount comes out of the second phase for any roof redos because of that hailstorm. So I just wanted to give everybody an update on that. And I think that's it. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
And then one as clarification question, the budget committee members are also going to be part of that budget committee, correct?
The budget committee members,
The board budget committee members
the board budget
are
committee
also going to be
members,
part of that.
Mr.
budget
Snow, Mr. Scanlon, and myself will also be a part of that budget process so that we can bring back to you, similar as Mr. Scanlon does on the CBOC, some of the conversation that will be happening at the table. And we won't, I'm sure, get into what the cuts potentially could be until we do some education process, and then people will have some time to digest different aspects of what's going on. But as I shared with the legislature, the board will constantly be working on what things we could do to improve any efficiencies that are out there.
Mr. Perlman.
I just have a couple of questions about the Budget Advisory Committee. Is there a time frame for how many weeks or months this group will be meeting?
This will be an ongoing committee that will be constantly meeting, probably through, we've got a situation where we're going to have to figure every year where we're at as far as the ARC payment goes. And so I would guess that it would meet heavily during the first half of the year and then maybe not be meeting, but then again the next year pick up. So I'm assuming that some people may roll off and some new people may come on, but what we'd love to see is people who become well educated in the process, so that as you go through each year, maybe it doesn't take quite as long because the education process doesn't quite need to be there. And I'm sure they'll put together some kind of an education packet, so as somebody rolls off and a new person rolls on, they'll be able to review the packet of information, but it will be an ongoing committee.
And will this committee consider budget recommendations coming from administration, or will they themselves come up with recommendations for the administration to consider?
All the above. Just based on previous committees like this where we had severe state cuts and caused you to do this same kind of activity, once you educate them on, one, what are your revenue sources? Two, how do you spend those revenue sources? Three, what items have the least impact on students? They'll end up creating priority lists. You'll work through some processes where you'll break into groups and create some things to look at, priorities. They'll come back as a big group, and then part of what they're, if it's like my previous history, and I suspect it will be, we'll have to come back with questions. They'll have a lot of questions on how much would we save if we did this? How much would we save if we did this? And some we can answer on the fly. Others will have to do a little research, and then we'll come back. But the whole group will have an opportunity to say, let's consider this. And then someone in the room can say, I'll do a little research and tell you what that does if we cut X, whatever X is. And sometimes they may know what that specific function is. It may be in an area that someone may know a lot about, and they can say, well, here, let me share with you what that position does or what that program does. But that's why it's so complicated, because you need to look at everything so that everyone feels like we've tried to process this. And if we say to all the district, let's say district departments come back with a 5% cut, they have to bring something back to you, and then you respond to that as a committee. So that's how I've seen them work in the past. I would presume that it will be pretty similar to that.
Okay, thanks.
And then everything at the end, the board would get a recommendation, and then you decide. And you may send them back to the drawing board too and say, well, this is close and that's close, but can you look at X? Of course, you'll have board members there who also can carry any comments that the board members have as well to the committee, or me as well. So, I mean, all of us can carry those comments. But we'll keep you up to date as we move through the committee's working. I think we've set the first meeting for January 12th? 18th, excuse me, January 18th. So we're moving forward, and once we get all the names and have our first meeting, then we'll ask the committee what days are best for them to meet, because I really think we need to meet a couple of times a month early on to get it moving. And then maybe you can go down to once a month. But I think you are going to need to regroup that committee in the fall of 2018. Even if we get this taken care of, you still need to look at it again for the next year, presuming that we still are going to have an ARC payment, which I think is pretty likely. I mean, it doesn't look like it's going away to me. So I think that's the issue, is figuring that out.
All right, we'll move on to Board Governance Committee. Mr. Snow.
Thank you, Madam President. The committee met on November 7th, and November 27th, sorry. Our next meeting is February 15th, right after Valentine's Day, for anybody. During our meeting, we discussed board evaluation and self-evaluation. We're looking at the NASB numeric board evaluation. They have like a tool that the committee's looking at. Our goal is to potentially have a board evaluation completed by every board member by the summer of 2018. We're also going to include probably a self-eval, but we are looking into the logistics of that. During our meeting, we also discussed the board handbook, and committee members will be submitting their updates over the holiday break. We've also updated our internal policy on board travel, and we submitted that to the policy committee, and I think Mr. Perlman is going to address that today. Okay. And our next meeting is on the 15th of February. We plan to discuss the code of conduct, the board code of conduct, and the duties and function of the Board of Education. So if you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll try my best to answer them.
Any questions for Board Governance? Okay, speaking of policies, next up is Policy Committee. Mr. Perlman.
Yes, thank you. we were supposed to meet last week. I actually came down with the flu at the early part of last week, so I asked to have that moved. I think we're going to be meeting in just a few days this week. Oh, is it tomorrow? Okay, I knew it was tomorrow or Thursday, so we'll be meeting tomorrow. A couple of things that we went over last time was this travel policy suggested by the Board Governance Committee, which is good in light of the bigger picture of spending in the district, and so that's just something that we want to, self-govern as best we can. The other topic we talked about was a transgender policy, or as it stands right now, a practice, which is something that I want this board to pass, would be a transgender policy, but we're in the process of putting together what at this point are our guidelines practice. It doesn't matter what it's called right now. It's just essentially a policy in form, and we're still reviewing that, making sure it's the best practice that we can have for the district, and we'll need to decide if that's going to be a policy or a practice or some combination of both, and so we'll be talking about that again tomorrow.
Okay. Next up would be the Americanism Committee, which was chaired by Ms. Williams. So if anyone else on the committee would like to give an update. Mr. Snow?
So the Americanism Committee met early November, I believe. We had a presentation from the Supervisor of Library Services. I will try my best at her last name. Her name is Laura Petich. Sorry. Okay. And she gave an overview of what they do in library services, how they help students as well as teachers. Most likely, what they typically are moving into is showing students how to do correct research on the internet. And it was very helpful and refreshing to get an update on it's not just library services, it's media services as well.
All right. Next up is student assignment plan. Mrs. Gotting.
And we're going to meet after the start of the new year, once we kind of get back into the process of student selection and all of those sorts of things.
All right. Legislative Committee, we will start to really gear up in the next couple of weeks and start our regular meetings for the legislative session. But we did participate in the Retirement Committee hearing on December 15th, and Ms. Gotting represented us wonderfully at that. So if you'd like to share anything from that hearing.
I think what I'd like to share is that the state senators are very aware of where we're at as far as our funding, and we're certainly better off than the city and the police. So I think that's a good thing, and I got to go after them, so that was also a positive. They're very much aware, and they're very attuned to what we're doing and want to be a part of helping us. They thanked us for the many times, and I know I've been down there a number of times to meet with senators, so they thanked us for that and for being a part of it. I thanked them for the legislation to move the investments to the Nebraska Investment Officer, and we'll continue to have dialogue as we go into this next legislative session. We told them it was our number one priority for this next legislative session, and if we can, we're working right now to see if we can get you a clip of that testimony so that you can see that and hear my comments if you didn't catch it on TV when it occurred. So I think it was overall, it was very positive. They were very upbeat about just our awareness of just looking at numbers and being thoughtful, and I think in hearing and sitting through all the presentations, I think we're doing a great job, so.
All right. CBOC, Matt, do you have any other updates? Okay. Then our final one is Superintendent Search Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. Up first, for anybody, if you have any information or would like to provide input or have comments or suggestions or questions, please go to superintendentsearch@ops.org. So first off, we met on November 30th. Our next meeting has yet to be determined, but I think we'll be getting a meeting set up pretty soon. The job application for the superintendent the job posting closes January 5th. So just for the community as well, nobody on the board or nobody in the district will receive these until Ray and Associates gives them to the board after January 5th. I wanted to we'll review the applications in mid-January, and the committee would like to set up some tentative dates for the community as well as the media. So on January 30th at 4:30, we will be conducting media interviews with the finalists for the superintendent search from 4:30 to 5, and from 5 to 6:30, we'll be having a community meet and greet with the finalists, I apologize. And the board interviews will begin at 7 p.m. This is assuming that everything goes as planned. These are tentative dates for January 30th, media interview at 4:30, community meet and greet from 5 to 6:30, and superintendent interviews starting at 7 p.m. on January 30th, right here in the boardroom. I have some additional information for board members. I called everybody about the lunches and meetings. Mr. Ray is going to send emails to confirm that. And then also, Mr. Ray will be reaching out to everybody on the committee and the board, the entire board, about a training that Ray and Associates will be conducting. I believe it is the interview bias training, and that will most likely be January 13th or 14th. So he would check with you guys on your availability to meet, to go through that training. And that's everything I have. Any other questions?
I think I'd just like to reiterate, because I know I've gotten a lot of people from the community and emails and phone calls asking, well, who's applied, how many people have applied, and no one on our board knows that. I don't know that, Mr. Evans doesn't know that, the members of the superintendent search committee, no one has access to that information, because the applications are all going through the firm that we're working with, Terrain Associates, so we do not see those applications until after the application period has been closed and they are brought to the board as a whole to review. Mr. Perlman?
And just because I think this was a question I got more than any other question during our first superintendent search. I'm not sure why. So I just want everyone to know that all applications are accepted, internal, external. Like I said, I don't know why I was asked that so often last time, whether or not internal candidates would be considered, but everyone's going to be considered who applies.
Yes. Internal, external, everyone, please apply if you meet the criteria for the qualifications for being the superintendent of Omaha Public Schools. This is an important task and job for the Board of Education, and we take it very seriously. We also will be listening to our constituents as well as our stakeholders on their input on January 30th as well.
Okay, any other board questions? Okay, we do not have anything under receipt of reports, so I'll recognize Mr. Snow for a motion.
I think I'm doing option 2. I move that the Board of Education go into closed session for the protection of the public interest and for the prevention of needless injury to the reputation of individuals to discuss with the superintendent, secretary to the board, Connie Kanoki, Tony Turnquist, and legal counsel, negotiations, pending litigation, and legal advice.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Snow and a second by Dr. Holman. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please, Mr. Ray.
Perlman.
Aye.
Ryan.
Aye.
Scanlon. Snow. Cassidy.
Aye.
Gadding.
Aye.
Holman.
America.
Aye.
7-0.
Motion carried. Let me remind the board that the purpose for closed session is for the protection of the public interest and for the prevention of needless injury to the reputation of individual, to discuss with the superintendent, secretary to the board, Connie Kanoki, Tony Turnquist, and legal counsel, negotiations, pending litigation, and legal advice. Let the record reflect that the board went into closed session at 9:46 PM.